Welcome, everyone. My name is Danny Garcia Moreno. I'm the Climate Resilience Planner with Anthropocene Alliance, and we're leading this workshop series called Rooted in Resilience, which is our green infrastructure training series for community-based organizations. Today, we have a very special presentation from Dr. Joni Palmer with the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. She'll be guiding us through a conversation around green infrastructure 101 is what we're calling it. But before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. So we have a short and sweet agenda. Today, we'll go through our housekeeping, then we'll head into our conversation with Dr. Joni Palmer, and we'll have time for Q&A. Then we'll break into small groups and do a small group discussion session facilitated by members of the A2 team. Then we'll have an opportunity to share out lessons learned from our discussions, and we'll head into closing and just next steps. So for some housekeeping before we get started, since we are on Zoom, if you feel comfortable, we encourage you and we would love for everyone to have their cameras on. During the presentation, if you could use the raise hand function or chat for questions. And as a reminder, I'll be sharing around the survey that we had for this workshop series. So if someone from your organization could take that again, that would be really, really helpful. And with that, I'll introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Joni Palmer. So Dr. Joni Palmer has over 30 years of experience blending professional practice and academia. She has worked across various government and private sectors in cities like Albuquerque, Denver, Boulder, Boston, Seattle, and San Francisco. Her expertise encompasses research consultation, community engagement, environmental planning, and arts and cultural planning. She has also taught at several universities nationwide. In 2020, she joined the Southwest Environmental Finance Center as a project director, leveraging her skills in qualitative research, landscape architecture, and community planning to focus on the social, cultural, and financial aspects of water in small to mid-sized and disadvantaged communities. We're very lucky that she's joining us today to share her experience and expertise. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Joni Palmer and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, and thanks for inviting me. Yeah, so this is, I'm calling it Green Infrastructure 101, just kind of pretty quickly moving through the basics or kind of the fundamentals of green infrastructure. Next slide. So what I'm going to be talking about today, I'll just really briefly who we are, who is the Southwest EFC, and what is green infrastructure. And as that relates to climate change and resiliency, partnerships, the challenges and opportunities at all scales. So we're talking very small to extra, extra large. And then we'll be talking about equity and equitable development, and particularly speaking to seniors and children. So I'll get moving along here. So the Southwest EFC, here's our website, and I think the slide deck is going to be shared with all of you. You can click the link up at the top. Our tagline is, we promote self-reliance through innovative training and assistance focused on actionable results. And so we really believe in the hands-on and working with organizations to help them be able to do the work that they need to do. Next slide. We are part of a larger network, the Environmental Finance Center Network. Each of us are affiliated with an EPA region, so you can see that we're down here in New Mexico, part of Region 6. Each of us has different focus and different levels of expertise in different areas. So we work very closely together. I think of us as sister centers. Next slide. So some of our areas of expertise are in this slide here, and I'll be speaking to the green infrastructure as well as an area that I'm getting very involved in is the workforce development, green workforce development. Next slide. So what is green infrastructure? This is the EPA's website, has a ton of information. I'm not expecting you to be able to read that slide, but the link at the top, you can click and go to their main site for green infrastructure. Next slide.
Kidney infection, bladder infection.
And this is an updated, the previous slide on the EPA website They have previous definitions, and this definition is one that's meant to really focus on a few things. So green infrastructure is a method of water management that is as sustainable, environmentally friendly, and cost-effective as possible. Focuses on creating ecosystems to treat polluted stormwater runoff before it enters aquifers, streams, or other waterways. So thinking about environmentally friendly, that it's cost effective, that it's sustainable, and that we are treating that polluted stormwater runoff. So that's the foci of the definition from the EPA and the definition that we work with at the Southwest DFC. Next slide. When I talk with people about green infrastructure, one of the main things I like to highlight is that it's not about supplanting gray infrastructure. The idea is that it's an integration. And as you see on this slide, and you can find it via the source, it's from the Council of Ministers in Canada. It's a really great resource as learning about green infrastructure, and I use it quite often. But as you'll see, it starts with those engineered assets up at the top, saying that this is what we have a lot of. And so the green infrastructure is a means by which we can start to complement and actually move into new ways of imagining our urban infrastructures, and as well as our rural infrastructures. So again, if you look at the fourth bar, gray infrastructure, but then we talk about enhancing those assets and thinking about, and down below, climate-related challenges and how the different natural-based, and I'll talk about a little bit of this terminology in a minute, nature-based solutions have a great number of benefits, and that they're helping us deal with issues of stormwater and extreme heat. We're hearing a lot more about that in the last couple of years. Coastal hazards, rising sea levels, and floods, as well as some of the other things that are related to habitat conservation and wildlife management. Next slide. So basically what we're talking about in this diagram is that we're thinking about our social systems and our ecosystems and where they come together. And that coming together involves all the different stakeholders, the users, human and non-human. It's interdisciplinary. We can't do this work without thinking about all the various disciplines and different walks of life, the different people who are involved in making green infrastructure happen. We're also talking about landscape architects, and we're talking about planners, and also to highlight well-being. We're talking about people's quality of life, as well as the biodiversity, the quality of life for our non-human partners in the world. Next slide. So what is green infrastructure, and why green infrastructure? And what's the big deal? Why are people getting so excited about this and committing a lot of time and energy? So it's a compelling water management option for communities and systems of all sizes. Think from very small to extra large, from rural isolated areas to tens of millions in metro regions. And what makes it such a compelling water management option is that, again, that integration of gray and green, and starting to reimagine our cities based on what we can learn from the natural environment. Next slide. So as you'll see on this slide, there's a variety of different terms that are used, and they're used rather interchangeably. And so you'll see here that GI, green infrastructure, is what I'll typically be using throughout this presentation. But there's also green stormwater infrastructure, and the focus of that is on stormwater. When we talk about blue-green infrastructure, we hear people on the coasts talking about this, is the emphasizing the blue and the green. We also talk about nature-based, or, nature did it first. Low impact, or LID. So we're is thinking about this particular tagline, right? Is that we are going to slow it down, spread it out, let it soak in. So that's some of the terminology. Next slide. Oops. Is that Oh, it's coming. It's, yeah, okay. It's populating itself. Okay, so, and I don't mean to show this as a dichotomy, but to put them side by side. And so the gray on the left-hand side and the green on the right-hand side. So when we're thinking of the words water infrastructure, most people associate, pipes and concrete lined drainage trenches or treatment plants. They think of the gray. With green infrastructure, we're talking about water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure that integrates natural systems, and that's what you see on the right-hand side. We can think about the plants, the water cycle, soil filtration, all of these as important functional attributes of green infrastructure. So when we talk about green infrastructure, like infiltration basins, trenches, planters, rigged up to harvest rainwater from buildings, wetlands, whether they're constructed or they're naturally occurring. There's a lot of different examples, and I'm going to go through some slides that will show you some different examples of what we're talking about. So the next slide is stormwater infrastructure. And we can think about this in terms of, if you do look at the gray infrastructure image on the left and the green on the right. And I also have some of the co-benefits of using permeable pavers and a rain garden instead of a storm drain. So we can think about this as the opportunity for the water to seep into the ground through the cracks between the pavers. And also you're going to be diverting that water to adjacent planters or rain gardens. So it's not just going into and potentially overburdening a system based on if it's a heavy rain cycle, whether it's a 100-year flood, which is happening more frequently, or other such things. Next slide. So another example of stormwater infrastructure, we can think about the sewer pipe versus the infiltration trench. And so it's a conveyance of stormwater away from roads and buildings. And so we can do it with the green, we can do it fully gray, but we can also do it in the infiltration trench. It's a combination of gray and green. You are using pipes, but you're also using plant material to help with filtration and to break down the pollutants associated with the adjacent road, some of the heavy metals and the oils, etc. Next slide. Wastewater infrastructure. You can see a wastewater treatment plant on the left, a constructed wetland on the right. And the constructed wetland, this is actually out in Arcata, California, and it's a population of around 10,000 people. And this is how they treat their municipal wastewater. So the treatment plant is connected with a wildlife sanctuary. So it's a combination of gray and green treatment of that wastewater. And it's taken a while for that green infrastructure, for that constructed wetland to grow up into what its responsibilities are. So it does also take that time, because it's a living system. It's not just built and ready to go. So next slide. Climate change and resiliency. The tagline is, we want to capture, we want to slow it down, and we want to let that water filter down through the soil and replenish aquifers. And so part of what makes green infrastructure compelling and a timely option is its ability to absorb and mitigate effects of climate change. Much of our current infrastructure was built with a very different idea of what a 100-year storm looks like, right? And so now we're seeing across the board, anywhere in this country and across the world, is an increase in frequency and intensity of storm events. So green infrastructure is very important to the future of our communities, whether you're urban, suburban, or rural. Next slide. There's a lot of co-benefits to green infrastructure, and it will improve air quality. You might have to click through. I'm not sure what's going on with that slide. Improve air quality, improve mental health of community members in terms of their interaction with nature, aesthetically pleasing. So it's something that people want to see instead of just concrete. It benefits the watershed, everyone upstream and downstream. So people thinking about the context of being upstream is thinking about who your neighbors are and who your neighbors are downstream. It reduces the burden on wastewater treatment plants, and once it's built and it's thriving in its ecology, in its built ecology, there is financial efficiencies. There are financial efficiencies. Next slide. But it's really important that we create partnerships, and they are the key to successful implementation. So the next slide, we're thinking about all of the various people who are involved in making green infrastructure happen, from the conceptualization, the planning, the design, the implementation, the construction, but also the operations and the maintenance. And here in the US, we tend to siloize all of these different activities at a municipal governmental level. We need to go across the hallway, basically, oftentimes in many cities, and talk with those people in the utilities, public works, talk with planners, architects, and engineers, and work with community groups and nonprofits. So there's a lot of challenges. And do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, it seems like my screen is no longer advancing with the slide, so I'm so sorry about that.
Well,
Let
that's okay.
me,
That's okay. I will.
yeah, let's try that again.
All right.
Thank you, Joni.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Let me see where that is. Hold on a second. Share my screen. All right, and I will change this over. Can everyone see my screen? All right.
Yes.
So there's a lot of challenges, and many of those challenges relate to property ownerships, and at the core of that is that, you know, watersheds don't honor jurisdictional boundaries, and that we're also talking about the various policies that exist across those jurisdictional boundaries. Again, we need to talk across break down these silos. There's also a lot of fear of change. There's a lot of myths. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And there's also concerns about liability. So when we talk about one of the myths is that it means more maintenance, and that's actually not the case. And so this is an image of actually a friend of mine's two little kids doing some maintenance in a recently upgraded site. But I guess what I'm getting more at, well, there's a couple of things to think about here is how do you involve community members in that operations and maintenance, have them gain ownership of these places and want to see them working, but also to be aesthetically pleasing. So, and a lot of this is, you know, some hard labor, and this is out in a small town north of Taos, so a very small community. Whoops. And one of the things that, you know, when we talk about that, the myth or the misconception that green infrastructure means more maintenance, what it means is a different kind of maintenance and a different set of workers that we need. And this Brookings report is an excellent way to introduce yourself and others to these, to the fact that I'm moving things around here. That there are nearly 17 million workers working in the water sector, and we are losing those workers to primarily what people call a silver tsunami. That we are losing a large portion of those people who have been in the business, have been out there working in the water sector, especially on the ground, for decades, and now they're retiring. This workforce is primarily very white and male, and they are aging out of employment. So to learn more about that, you can go to this report. Just a couple highlights from the report is that the water employers need to empower staff and help them to adjust to these new ways of doing things. And that means piloting new efforts, creating training programs, and also supporting the water workforce in this new era. And there needs to be a lot more communication discussion about what is happening. And we need those champions at the state and national level to provide us with that technical guidance, programmatic support, and that overarching investments in the water workforce. Here's an example of how you can partner. When I was talking about partnerships are important, this is a really amazing program up in Minneapolis. It's Green Workforce Development, working with young people between 14 and 16 years old. It's a 2-year summer employment program, and it can help students introduce them to the water sector, but also give them some skills. And if they decide that they don't want to go on and get a college degree, they will have some skills that they can get a good paying job and actually a meaningful job in their community. So there's a lot of opportunities with green infrastructure or green stormwater infrastructure. You know, water is an asset, and we have to think about how we can support that in as many ways as possible. And there's a lot of opportunities in terms of education and interpretation, educating people about where their water comes from. If they're looking at green infrastructure in an urban setting, is interpretation to help them understand how this is different. And then a lot of other things in terms of, you know, there's flood mitigation, but we're also, in terms of policies, the opportunities are to make them much more robust and to create examples for many different people to use. So we're talking about it at all scales. And you can see from this set of images that we go from a residential garden all the way to the landscape scale. And these projects are in New Mexico. So in a place in an arid environment. And so it takes on a very different aesthetic and one that people do need to get used to. So here's a friend of mine, Brad Lancaster. This is very grassroots green infrastructure in a neighborhood in North Tucson called, why am I spacing on the name now? Dunbar Springs. And Brad Lancaster has a fabulous site. It's called Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. Check it out. And you'll read his story about how this started as an individual effort between, it was he and his brother, and then building that into a neighborhood level effort, and the city looking at them and saying, wow, this is great. And institutionalizing that, the information and the knowledge and the skills to be used across the city. When we talk about equity and equitable development, we necessarily have to talk about, and that's where this Venn diagram down in the right-hand side, if we're talking about sustainable communities, we need to think about that they be socially equitable, that they're environmentally sound, but they also have to be economically feasible. And so green infrastructure can help to reduce the disproportionate impacts of stormwater and flooding on overburdened communities, but it also provides those benefits of bringing nature into those neighborhoods and communities. Soak Up the Rain is a great EPA program that has some upcoming webinars that you all might be interested in. So I highly recommend going to that website. So what we want to think about in the EFC, we created this diagram for when we talk with communities, that project development is towards shovel-worthy projects, not just shovel-ready projects. We're thinking about a project that takes into account the community culture, community values. What is their financial capacity? So you don't want to put in a system that's going to financially burden them. Their ability to use technology. You don't want to put in any kind of infrastructure that is going to require technology that they do not have the capabilities to continue to use on their own. And then operations and maintenance, that you have to have your staff has to be on board, but also you have to provide training so that they can actually not just get that project in the ground, but that it has a long lifespan. So, and I'm right off the bat, I'm going to thank Danielle Aragoni, because these are her slides that she's letting me use. This is a new book. I attended her webinar the other day. She's the managing director of policy and solutions at the National Housing Trust. And this, it's kind of a no-brainer if you think about it. We have a growing share of older adults in the United States and in many other countries. And we also have growing climate risks, and that those growing climate risks have a financial impact on communities and on individuals. So we need to pay attention to climate resilience for an aging nation. And so she says we have a poor understanding of older results, and thinking about 1 in 6 live in poverty, 30% live alone, 40% have ambulatory limitations. So we want to think about how are we planning and designing our communities for a wide range of abilities, and also for a growing senior population. So she says that, redefining climate resilience, and she says this is just part one, is climate responsive infrastructure investment. So the gray and the green infrastructure solutions, and doing those potentially in some demonstration projects, doing them in very public settings, like you see this image here for a community center in Washington, D.C. It's about teaching people about accessibility, open space, about resiliency, and also tied to the green infrastructure is renewable energy. And so helping people to put all the pieces together. AARP is doing some amazing stuff. They're a great resource for looking at how we can plan and design our communities for a growing elderly population. Another population to think about is our children, are the kids who are, and this is where the Green Schoolyards America, and Sharon Gamson Danks is the CEO and co-founder. She said I could use her slides in this presentation. Green Schoolyards is a really great way to help people to see, again, demonstration green infrastructure that works for the children, but also the rest of the community. It's very visible. Kids are a large overlooked population of our United States, and they spend a lot of time at school. So this is a place where we can help them in terms of their quality of life. They're having that connection to nature, teaching them about sustainability and what resilient communities look like and feel like. So that resilience demands interdisciplinary planning and communication. So you can't have resilient schools without resilient cities. So because they face the same complex problems. So working together is how we're going to transform our environments. Again, whether you're rural, suburban, or urban. So you can see an example here on the left-hand side of a very typical urban schoolyard, right? That's very typical of, I grew up at a school like that. And kids are really vulnerable if you think about, as well as older adults. They're more sensitive to extreme heat, to pollutants, and now we're dealing with these extreme temperatures that we have not had in a lot of different places before. I'm thinking of Portland, Oregon. Extreme precipitation, air quality problems from wildfires. We're thinking about sea level rise in coastal areas. And we're also, and this is where getting young people to better understand biodiversity and habitat loss. So what I talked about today, and I hope that, in our breakout rooms and in the Q&A, we can talk a little bit more about some of these things, but, that green infrastructure is at all scales, and a variety of technologies that are being applied. That green infrastructure is something very timely for us in terms of addressing climate change and creating resilient communities. But the partnerships are critical to making the implementation possible, and also because these are living systems, to make them not just insert these green infrastructures, but also for them to thrive in whatever environment that they are in. There's a lot of challenges and opportunities, but the more conversations we have, we'll turn those challenges into opportunities. And equity and equitable development. A lot of people don't really think about our vulnerable populations, two of them being seniors and children. So I know I went through that really, really fast. I hope that you have some questions.
Thank you so much, Joni. That was wonderful. Yes, we'll take questions now for a couple of minutes before we head into our breakout groups. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or unmute and speak out your question, or use the chat function. We'll keep track of questions like that. So I see we have a question in the chat from Belvin. What are the mid-sized cities that you see as leading on green infrastructure implementation?
My hometown, Buffalo, New York, is doing a lot of really amazing things with green infrastructure and really highlighting the gray integrated with the green. There's a lot of different I guess you could see different examples, not only in the urban streetscape, but also in their park systems, the Olmsted Park System. They're doing a lot of really innovative stuff with community groups to get them involved in thinking about how green infrastructure is going to be implemented. So Buffalo is one of them. Tucson is way ahead of the game. They have the oldest reclaimed wastewater system in the country. 40 years old this month, and they're doing amazing stuff. And Bert in the Dunbar Springs neighborhood, Brad is one of those people who has really given a boost to green infrastructure. You can see it everywhere you go in Tucson. So those are the two ones in very different geographies.
Cool. We have another question in the chat. From Jen, what are the most common barriers to getting approval for green infrastructure approaches that you've encountered?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we just in Albuquerque just changed our ordinance so that green infrastructure has to be a part of all new development in the city. So one of the common barriers is that it's not something that is immediately thought about, that we do what it is that we're used to doing, which is the gray infrastructure. So that is one of the barriers. It's just that it's not familiar. Another barrier is that there's not a lot of standards and not a lot of policies that guide people. And we need that locally, statewide, and even nationally. A third one is misconceptions and misinformation. There was a campaign here in Albuquerque a couple years ago saying that green infrastructure created standing water and therefore mosquitoes and disease. And so that's an opportunity to educate people about green infrastructure, and that if there is standing water, then there's something wrong with the implementation, the operations, and the maintenance.
We have another question from Kevin. It says, what are the strategies for using nature-based solutions to prevent or reduce flooding and landslides?
Yeah, that's something that we really have to up our game, right? Especially if we talk about, the rains that are impacting California, right? It's a large aerial coverage. So what that means is looking at the larger landscape at watershed planning scale. So that you're thinking about source water protection, you're thinking about where people are building. So are they continuing to build on these really vulnerable sites? And so I think it takes that bigger picture, getting people to understand their context, and then moving down to the site level. And choosing, the site selection is really important for that new development.
Thank you. I think we have time to take one more question before we go to breakout groups. Any takers?
And I'll add about from Kevin's question is, the watershed planning is something that is on the rise in the US. And it's something for me, I used to teach at the university level. We need to be educating young people, K through 12, our college students, about what is it, how do you think and behave with a watershed mentality? And I think that's where we're going to get the changes that we need, is that people are thinking about the larger context, not just about the individual site within which you're standing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's also resonating a lot with some of the projects that our members are undertaking. We have a lot of regional level grants and opportunities right now. So so hopefully, we can spearhead those efforts and make waves in watershed planning and management.
So Doreen just asked, how can the green workforce programs, how can they be funded? And they're funded in a variety of ways. EPA has some money. I would also, and I can share this with you, I've been creating a spreadsheet. I could call it a database, but it's a spreadsheet of all the different green workforce initiatives that are out there, primarily for young people. And I think it's important to reach out to them and ask them, again, this is partnerships, is working with their city, with their county, with other nonprofits to make these workforce programs available. And it's one of the things in terms of workforce development is a lot of young people don't know about jobs in the water sector. They don't learn about that in school. And then they think, oh, I have to go on and get an advanced degree to have this kind of a career. But they can, if a student is not interested in going on to college or immediately going on to college, they can go into these training programs and get jobs directly out of high school. And so St. Paul, Minnesota is doing some amazing work with their water and green water infrastructure workforce development. But I'm happy to share that out. I could share it with Danny and she could share that out.
Yes, that would be wonderful. And we'll be sharing, those resources as well as Joni's slides and notes from the presentation today, as well as the recording. So we'll have that available.